What is going on, all you Pokemon collecting maniacs out there? This is Ryan, the PikaPikaPaPa, and today we're talking about print volume at Pokemon Company International. And I think this is a really cool topic to talk about, right? Like, I know this information came out a little while ago. All of your favorite Poketubers have probably done videos on it, but I don't ever rush to produce content. Like, I want to make sure that I have time to digest it. I want to make sure that I have time to analyze it. And whenever I put something in front of you, I want to make sure that it's really well baked. And so it's taking me a little while to put some brain power into this and to put some charts into it and to think about it and talk about it. But here we are today, and rightfully so. There's been some angst over this number, right? 9.7 billion Pokemon cards were printed last year, and the reality is 35% of all the Pokemon cards that have ever been printed in the history of Pokemon have been printed over the last 2 years. Now, there's all kinds of different ways to take this and to think about it. Now, for us, if you're like me, I'm a collector, I'm an investor, I'm a hobbyist, I love Pokemon, I want to be in this for the long run, you have to have the question in your mind of, hey, in 3, 5, 10, 15, however many years, is there going to be any demand for these products? So is there any scarcity? You need scarcity and demand, right? The higher demand, the higher the scarcity, the higher the price. So those are some things to consider, and I think a lot of people were talking about this in a bunch of different lights, and I'm kind of excited to look at it maybe from a different angle, as we always do here. So the biggest thing that I wanted to talk about too is I've heard people comparing this possibly to a junk wax era. Now, as somebody, and I hate to date myself, but as somebody who actually collected in the 80s and 90s, I collected through the junk wax era. I have boxes and boxes and boxes of baseball, football, and basketball cards that are in my closet over here, which I only keep as kindling in case the apocalypse comes, because simply they're not worth anything. They're not worth the cardboard that they're printed on, but if there's ever a loss of power and I need to heat my home, I plan on using them as fire kindling, because what else are you going to do with them, right? So an interesting fact on this is, back in the 80s and 90s, there was no real release on print numbers, but there was a top set where the print numbers were leaked, okay? So this was Topps Baseball, so think about that. One set had 792 cards in it, and there was 5 million of each of those cards printed. That is almost 4 billion cards in one singular baseball set. Now, Topps produced all kinds of different variants of their sets back then. There was Fleer, there was Upper Deck, there was Ultra, there was Donruss, all kinds of different card companies that produce cards. So when you think about the junk wax era, remember what I just said too, that was specifically baseball. Now, baseball, that is an American market only. People in China, people in Japan, Germany, Italy, they don't give a flying fornication about American baseball, especially not back then. So all I'm saying is this, it is really unfair to compare it to the junk wax era because the numbers and the volumes just don't add up. Remember, these numbers for Pokemon that they launch, this is worldwide. Okay, these are worldwide numbers. These aren't just English and Japanese, right? There's all kinds of other languages that roll up into it as well. The other thing that I wanted to call out, and I read a really cool article on Fortune about the way Pokemon Company approached the pandemic, and they printed 9 billion Pokemon cards in order to stop the people from scalping. Like, what a noble cause. It wasn't just Pokemon deciding, hey, like, I really want to flood the market because I want to make more money. Obviously that is a happy upside. A lot of us, I was in a business that made a ton of money in the pandemic, and we were happy to do it, but we provided a service that was needed. It's not like we just arbitrarily found a way to scalp money. Pokemon did a great job attempting to protect you and me, the true collectors and the true hobbyists, by printing more cards so we had the opportunity to buy them at a fair price versus the people who were loitering, freaking Targets and Walmarts and all this stuff. And there were fights in the aisles where people were trying to pick up Pokemon cards. Just absolute insanity. So the fact that Pokemon did this, and I think that they did this for the right reason, the fact that you really can't compare this to a junk wax era at all. Like, the numbers just don't add up. I promise you, I am not kidding. Maybe I'll do a video sometime and show you my binders and binders and boxes of all the cardboard that I have that is worth nothing. So when we talk about that, I don't get the junk wax feeling, and I think it's a disservice to the hobby to even say that word because we're so far from that point. Now, the other thing that I thought was really cool is I took that graph, and a lot of people just talked about the numbers, but of course the numbers are important, but you have to take the numbers and you have to take it in context, right? So I took that graph that came out on Poke Beach where it talked about all the different years and all the different cards that were printed, and I put it here for us to look at in a more organized fashion. So it goes back to 2004 to 2010, there was 14 billion cards printed, right? Then in 14 to 16, that jumped. Now this is the total, right? Then from 14 billion total printed to 21.5 billion printed, right? And then in 2017, there was a total of 25.7 printed all time. So now that we're going year by year by year, now that we have that, we can start looking at how Pokemon Company grew their business over the years. So from 2017 to 2018, they printed 5% more cards, which is great. When you're in a business, you have to grow. If you're not growing, you're dying. So they should be printing more cards in hopes that there are people there with open arms waiting to accept it, right? And the other thing to call out too is if you look on the right, I also call out the number of languages that it's printed and the number of areas that it's sold in. So you'll see that from 2014 to 2016, it was in 10 languages and 74 areas. 2017, it jumped to 11 languages and 74 areas. Like, that's very important to note. 2018, again, 5% increase, 11 languages, 74 areas. 2019, 5% increase, super steady, 12 languages and 77 areas, right? So they printed it in a new language, they launched it in more areas. 2020, again, 5% increase in growth. So now we're starting to see a pattern, right? The Pokemon Company International is saying, hey, we're gonna print 5% more cards every single year, and we're gonna continue to ramp the languages and areas because guess what? Again, in 2020, 5% increase in production and an additional language it was printed in, right? From 12 languages to 13 languages. 2021 is where things get a little batty. Now, it was only up 11% year over year. So what that tells me is they probably started off that 2021 print run attempting to stay at that same 5% pace. But what happened was we had the pandemic hit. We had everything get crazy. We had the hobby going absolutely nuts. So they probably ramped up production at the end of the year, and that probably is what grew their rate so much year over year. Then you get into 2022. Now, look, the other thing to call out too is in 2020, 2021, and 2022, they didn't add any new languages. They were just like, oh my God, so much is going on. We can't add any additional languages. But what they did was they ramped the production up significantly in 2022, right? That was that Forbes article that I had read. So they ramped production up to 27%, which is huge year over year. That's where we start talking about, hey, 35% of all the Pokemon cards that have ever been printed have been printed in the last 2 years. But then the big call out, the big takeaway for me, and the one that gave me some feeling of comfort, the one that said, hey, listen, Pokemon Company is really trying to do things right, is in 2023, yes, they printed another 9.7 billion cards, but they backed off the year-over-year growth rate, right? So from 2021 to 2022, they printed 27% more cards. From 2022 to 2023, they only printed 22% more cards. Now, the big call out there too is, look, they added another language and they added 12 more areas. If you are going to launch a product in more areas and in an additional language, you are obviously going to have to print more cards. So not only did they print in 12 additional areas in one additional language, but they also throttled back on the year-over-year growth percentage, which is really exciting. And not for nothing, the language that they printed in was simplified Chinese. So they were now selling Pokemon cards on mainland China. They've always been in Taiwan. They've always been in Hong Kong. Well, I should say that. They've been in Hong Kong and Taiwan since 2019. But now they've launched in mainland China in a version called simplified Chinese. Now, mainland China has the second biggest world economy behind the US. So when you think about the volume that they would have to print in order to drop into mainland China, so it's not just like a drop of water in the ocean. I guarantee you they printed a ton of cards. And now you all know that I am a big grader and I have a big belief that PSA populations are a great indicator of overall macro level trends in the hobby. Now, besides English and Japanese, simplified Chinese is the number 3 most graded language at PSA right now, which is amazing. Think about German's been out there, Italian's been out there, every other language you can pretty much think of has been out there, but simplified Chinese is gaining a ton of steam and a ton of momentum in the grading space. And I think there are tons and tons and tons of these cards that are being printed in simplified Chinese simply because that is such an incredibly large market compared to everywhere else in the world. Think about it, the second biggest economy in the whole world is China, and now they've released into the bulk of that market. It is just absolutely amazing. And for me to see the fact that they've actually throttled down year over year, I think that they're trying to get into a better steady state. I will tell you this as somebody who inventory management is a big part of what I do as well. And nobody wants to have a bunch of products sitting on the shelves. Like as a company, that is wasted resources. You have to pay to store it. You have to pay to print. You've already paid to print it, right? That's a sunk cost. You've already paid for it. Now you have boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes of stuff sitting in inventory. You want to move that product. So I don't think Pokemon Company is trying to maliciously overprint things. It doesn't make sense from a business perspective. And when I look at it in this view right here, it doesn't make me feel like that's exactly what they're doing either. So when I saw this, I was really excited, and it made me think that what I really want to do, and I always say this, and I know it's really sucks, I know it's really not the right approach, but I can't wait to see 2024's numbers. I know that's so far in the future, but I'm hoping to see that year-over-year growth continue to throttle down, and then I'm going to feel really good. But again, the fact that they launched it in 12 more areas, one additional language, not of which, Chinese is a big deal, and the year-over-year growth throttled down a little bit, I think that for all of us who are in this as a collector and a hobbyist and want to see some price appreciation in the future, I think that's a good sign. Now, is there going to be more sealed collections in the future than there is now? There's going to be plenty of sealed product in the future. That's what I'm trying to say here, because a lot of us are sealed collectors, and I'm one. So the only way all of this works is if the hobby continues to grow. We need more collectors in the future than we have now. We need Pokemon to do exactly what they're doing. We need to go into more languages and more areas. It needs to become more global, because we want more people to want the product that we have today. If there's 10,000 boxes today and 10,000 people want it, well, it's not going to command a premium. But if there's 10,000 boxes in 10 years from now and 100,000 people want that, then it's going to command a high premium. So we need to make sure, as I always talk about, I don't care what part of the hobby you're in, I don't care if you're a collector, an investor, a player, anything, you're all good for the hobby. Everybody's great for this hobby. We want this to grow. We want to have a ton of fun along the way. So some of the things that I wanted to call out too is, as I just said, PSA is a big driver for me. And when you look at this, in May of 2021, PSA graded 93,000 TCG cards. Now, you got to take this with a grain of salt, because PSA and all the other graders in May of 2021 were just completely buried. Like the volume, they couldn't keep up with it. There was all kinds of stuff going on. So take that with a big grain of salt. But the interesting thing is, in June of 2023, 401,000 cards were graded. And I use this simply to say, like, hey, the supply is there, but I also think that the demand is there. I think more people are getting cards graded, even though there's more of them out there. I think that speaks to a really strong hobby. And then even the other places of Pokemon, right? Pokemon Go has been downloaded over 1 billion times. Again, every time that is downloaded, that is good for you and me. It's bringing more people into the hobby, more people into the Pokemon space. Then you look at software sales, right? Software sales are up 10%. They increased by 40 million units year over year. Again, that is good for us. Everything Pokemon is up. And that is a really fun place to be in. It's a really exciting place to be in. I'm not scared about this increase in production now. And if in 2024 I see a huge increase, it goes up from 22% year over year to 30, 40, 50% year over year, I might be pumping the brakes a little bit. But for now, I am feeling okay. The other thing that I wanted to talk about here is we talk about the importance of everybody loving Pokemon. This was a fascinating thing that I came across when I was doing my research. So this is a list of the highest grossing media franchises of all time. Now, I was aware that Pokemon was number one. What I was not aware of, Mickey Mouse and Friends. Now, this isn't Disney. This is the Mickey Mouse and Friends media genre, right? So you talk about your kids watch Mickey Mouse cartoons on TV. That's what this is. So Pokemon has done $88 billion in revenue since 1996. Mickey Mouse and Friends has done $52 billion in revenue since 1928. Like that doesn't even register on my mind. To me, that is absolutely amazing. And then think about Star Wars, right? Everybody loves Star Wars. Me and my kids and my wife, we watch Star Wars movies all the time at night. Star Wars is such a big part of, it's just such a big part of our modern, movie-going history. It's amazing. And even that huge genre since 1977 has only done $51.8 billion. Absolutely insane to think that not only is Pokemon number one, but they are so far ahead of everybody else, you can't even compare it. So all of that is interesting. All of that is important. But for me, here's what I'm going to say. The products don't seem stagnant to me, right? Everything is always about supply and demand. As long as long-term demand meets the supply, as long as people continue to come into the hobby, as long as Pokemon continues to do a good job of advertising itself and branding itself on multiple different fronts, which obviously it has done very, very well since 1996, I think we are going to be more than okay, right? And yes, of course, some people left the hobby. There's nothing wrong with that. I think we would all agree that during those pandemic times, during those pump and dump times, there were a lot of people in the hobby who weren't going to be here long-term, and we probably didn't want them in here long-term. But then you also have a lot of people who were reignited by it, who found their childhood joy and their passion, and they remembered how cool it was to open up Pokemon card packs and to find your favorite Pokemon and to see shiny cards and hollows and all of the amazing stuff that we love so much. So listen, I think the fact that Pokemon is also actively expanding the reach into more countries and expanding into more areas, that is only going to serve for all of us very, very well in the long run. So at the end of the day, listen, I'm going to keep a close eye on all of this. You know, PikaPikaPapa will always be here to analyze whenever we get no print and to run numbers and talk about it. If you guys have questions, comments, thoughts, whatever, drop it down below. But the biggest thing is don't FOMO, don't freak out. Have fun in the hobby because that's what it's all about. Everything is going to be okay. I appreciate you, and you guys have an epic one. Thanks, everybody. Bye.